In the 1880s, New York City experienced a great surge of population growth, mostly due to Italian immigration. From 1900 to 1915, 3 million Italians left Italy to come to America. Most of them were peasants who worked as artisans and menial farmers. In the broader scope of 1880 to 1939, 5 million Italians immigrated to America, and 4/5 came from the southern regions of Italy. The overpopulation of Italy could especially be seen in fragmented Mezzogiorno, which was located in the southernmost portion of the country. The Italian government also played a role in people moving to America. The government was made up of Northerners who treated the Southerners unfairly. This biased setup resulted in high protective tariffs on a majority of Northern goods. Southern land also lacked area for cultivation and didn't have enough resources such as iron or coal to be beneficial to the economy. Education was also failing at the time. The illiteracy rate was 70%, which was much larger than that of the rest of the world. Italy experienced a lot of poverty from large numbers of people inhabiting the country. Multiple natural disasters also played a role in people's decision to move to America. In the early 20th century, Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried an entire town near Naples. In 1908, a tidal wave and earthquake crossed the Strait of Messina and killed about 100,000 people. Southern Italians were exploited by their own people who shared the same religion, even the same nationality. This exclusion led to the family becoming closer and developing a tighter bond. The influx of people to America was termed New Immigration, which became known as the third and largest wave of immigration. The new immigration encompassed Jews, slaves, and Italians. Most of the Italians immigrated to the United States in 1913. The large amount of immigration ensured that the immigrants became an important aspect of the economy. The main reason many Italians left Italy was to achieve the American dream. They believed if they could work hard enough, then they could make something of themselves and bring their wealth back to their native countries. A large amount of immigrants were males from the ages of 24 to 45. They needed to fend for their families, many of whom were left behind. The average crossing over in the 1800s was around 40 days long, with an average steerage fare of $30. Most immigrants spent their journey crowded together with only the clothes on their backs. Those with first or second class tickets would have a private place to sleep, and food would be served in a dining room. However, the majority of immigrants had steerage class tickets and would sleep and eat on the bottom level of the ship. The crew would feed them lukewarm soup, boiled potatoes, and stringy beef.
The history of 2 generations of crime. The drama of absolute power and the men who violate it. The Godfather, Part 2.
What is your name?
The beds were narrow and sometimes placed in stacks of 3s. While on the boat, immigrants had to bathe themselves with salt water, which sometimes caused irritation and infection. Isola delle Lacrime, or Island of Tears, was what the Italians coming to America termed Ellis Island. When the Italians made it to Ellis Island, they had to go through an immigration station. This station was originally planned to be at Liberty Island, but Americans did not want the Statue of Liberty to be bothered by the immigrants. Since some shipping companies made profits by carrying human cargo, Many Italians were traded along with cotton, wood, and crops, all of which were documented for inventory. Once they arrived at Ellis Island, the immigrants were checked for any medical issues. The immigrants were branded with various letters for different problems. There was an X for physical conditions, an L if they were lame, CT for trachoma, S for senility, G for goiter, H for heart, and PG for pregnancy. Some immigrants were sent back if they were not approved to enter the States. Historians use the phrase birds of passage to describe immigrants who never intended to make the United States their permanent home. Unable to earn a livelihood in their home countries, they were migratory workers. Before 1900, an estimated 78% of Italian immigrants were men who sent money home to preserve the traditional order. Rather than seeking permanent homes, they desired an opportunity to work for a living, hoping to save enough money to return to a better life in the country of their birth. Overall, 20 to 30% of Italian immigrants returned to Italy permanently. The earliest Italian immigrants to the United States were Northern Italians, who became prominent as fruit merchants in New York and wine growers in California. Later, more and more migrants came from southern Italy, and the communities they formed reflected the fragmentation of southern regions such as Mezzogiorno. Many Italian immigrants never planned to stay in the United States permanently. However, the Italian immigrants of the 1880s did not want to farm, which implied a permanence that did not figure in their plans. Instead, they headed for cities, where labor was needed and wages were relatively high. Expecting their stay in America to be brief, Italian immigrants lived as inexpensively as possible and under conditions that native-born families considered intolerable. Italians who made it past Ellis Island tried to find jobs and money right away. Some immigrants went straight to a neighborhood on Mulberry Street called Little Italy, which appeared to be a place like home to them. Most other immigrants were forced to live in bad sections of New York. There were reports of places with one 12-by-12 room with 5 families living in it, only 2 beds and no table. Other conditions included no drinking water for days at a time, bed bugs, frozen pipes in the winter, and morbid heat in the summer. Not only did these immigrants face bad living conditions, but they also had to deal with the Americans. Many called the Italians, who could hardly speak English, wops and doggos. A majority of Italian immigrants were Catholic, but when they arrived in America, they discovered that the Catholic Church was dominated by an Irish hierarchy. Willing to work long hours for low wages, the Italians began to rival the Irish for much of the unskilled work available in industrial areas. This sometimes led to hostilities breaking out between the two groups of workers. The Italians were also recruited into the garment industry and, by the outbreak of the First World War, they had replaced the Jews as the main group in the sweated trades. Miscommunication and hate soon formed between the Italians and other groups. Italians were soon deemed members of the mafia and were looked down upon because of the trouble they brought. Since a lot of court cases arose and violence occurred, the amount of immigrants allowed became limited. Only 5,802 Italians were allowed to enter America per year. Americans were beginning to think that foreigners were diluting their American blood. Despite the hatred from other groups, the Italians were noted for their diligence and sobriety as workmen. Italian immigrants were particularly likely to take heavy construction jobs. About half of all Italian immigrants in the late 19th century were manual laborers. Contracted out by a professional labor broker known as a padrone, Italians dug tunnels, laid railroad tracks, constructed bridges and roads, and built the first skyscrapers. By as early as 1890, 90% of New York City's public works employees and 99% of Chicago's street workers were Italian. Many Italian immigrant women worked, but never as domestic servants. Many women took piecework into their homes to reconcile the conflicting need to both earn money and maintain a strong family life. Italian Americans were particularly successful in areas that did not require extensive formal education, such as sales and small business ownership. They tended to be underrepresented in professional occupations which required extensive education. In spite of the economic hardship of the immigrants, civil and social life flourished in the Italian-American neighborhoods of the large northeastern cities. Italian culture boasted opera clubs, Italian newspapers, and bocce courts, a version of lawn bowling. Also during this period, pizza emerged, first from wood ovens and then eventually from brick ovens, forming the classic New York-style brick oven pizza. An important event, the festa, became a significant connection to the traditions of many immigrants' ancestral villages in Italy and Sicily. The festa involved an elaborate procession through the streets in honor of either a patron saint or the Virgin Mary. In the procession, a large statue was carried by a team of men while musicians marched behind. Followed by food, fireworks, and general merriment, the festa became an important occasion that helped give the immigrants a sense of unity and common identity. Today, over 17 million Americans claim Italian ancestry.